The word hung in the air like poison. Deadweight. I watched Tara's lips curve into a smirk as she said it, her wine glass catching the candlelight at our dinner table. The conversation around us died instantly. My son Michael's fork clattered against his plate. Our guests, neighbors we'd known for years, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But Tara didn't flinch. She just stared at me with those cold green eyes, waiting for my reaction. I felt heat crawl up my neck, not from anger, but from pure humiliation. My hands trembled slightly as I placed my napkin beside my plate. I forced my lips into something resembling a smile, the kind you wear when you're bleeding inside but refuse to let anyone see. "Excuse me," I whispered, standing carefully. My chair scraped against the hardwood floor, the only sound in the suffocating silence. I walked to the kitchen, grabbed my purse, and left through the side door. Nobody followed me, not even my son. That night, driving home through empty streets, I realized something that made my chest ache. I had raised a son who didn't see me anymore. My name is Eleanor Thompson. I'm 60 years old, and until 5 years ago, I was a pediatric nurse at Cedar Valley Hospital in Portland, Oregon. I spent 37 years caring for other people's children, watching them grow, heal, and eventually leave my care with grateful parents. I loved my work. It gave me purpose, especially after my husband Daniel passed away from a sudden heart attack when I was 55. Michael was our only child, and after Daniel died, he became the center of my world. Maybe that was my first mistake, loving him so completely that I forgot to protect myself. I poured everything into making sure he succeeded. I helped with his college tuition when student loans weren't enough. I co-signed for his first car. When he met Tara at a marketing conference 3 years ago, I was genuinely happy for him. She seemed ambitious, confident, and driven. I thought those were good qualities. I didn't realize then that ambition without kindness is just cruelty with a business plan. And now here I was, a widow living alone, wondering when exactly my son had stopped seeing me as his mother and started seeing me as an inconvenience. The humiliation at that dinner party wasn't the first incident. It had started small, like most cruel things do. 6 months after Michael and Tara's wedding, they announced they were buying a house. I was thrilled for them. They showed me listings, asked my opinion on neighborhoods, and seemed genuinely excited about starting their life together. Then one evening, Michael called with a problem. "Mom, we're $20,000 short for the down payment," he explained, his voice tight with stress. "The seller won't negotiate, and we're afraid we'll lose the house." I didn't hesitate. I had savings from Daniel's life insurance and my pension. I could help. "I'll transfer the money tomorrow," I told him. His relief was audible through the phone. 2 weeks later, they closed on a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial in the suburbs. Tara posted photos on social media, praising their hard work and sacrifice without mentioning my contribution once. When I gently brought it up to Michael, he dismissed my concern. "Mom, you know how Tara is about privacy," he said. "She doesn't like broadcasting our finances." That was the first time I swallowed my hurt for the sake of peace. The suggestion came 3 months after the dinner party incident, wrapped in false concern like a gift with hidden thorns. Michael visited on a Sunday afternoon, something that had become increasingly rare. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped him with homework as a child and fidgeted with his coffee mug. "Mom, Tara and I have been talking," he began carefully, not meeting my eyes. "We think it might be time for you to consider downsizing." I set down my own mug slowly. "Downsizing? This house is too big for one person," he continued, his words rehearsed. "All these stairs, the maintenance, the yard work. You deserve to rest, to enjoy your retirement without all this responsibility." His voice was gentle, concerned even, but I recognized Tara's words coming from his mouth. She had planted this seed, and he was watering it. "I manage just fine," I replied quietly. "I know you do, but why struggle when you don't have to? We could help you find a nice apartment, something smaller and easier to maintain." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and wondered when he had learned to lie so smoothly. "I'll think about it," I said finally, because sometimes silence is the sharpest memory you can give someone. 2 months later, I stood in my empty living room, keys in my hand, watching the new owners walk through with their realtor. The house Daniel and I had bought 32 years ago, where we'd raised Michael, where every corner held a memory. It belonged to someone else now. Tara had helped orchestrate everything with terrifying efficiency. She'd recommended a realtor friend who promised a quick sale, found me a perfect rental apartment across town, and even organized the estate sale where strangers picked through my lifetime of belongings. "You're doing the right thing, Eleanor," Tara said on moving day, pulling me into a hug that felt like theater. She held up her phone, capturing our embrace. Later, I saw she'd posted it on social media with the caption, "Helping family through life's transitions, new beginnings for everyone, #family first, support." The photo had 63 likes. I stood there in my empty house, holding keys that no longer unlocked anything that mattered, and felt like a guest in my own life. "That's the last box," Michael said, appearing in the doorway. His eyes didn't quite meet mine. "Ready to go?" "No," I wanted to say. "I'm not ready." But I nodded anyway, because what choice did I have? The rental apartment was small, a one-bedroom unit in a dated complex near the highway. The walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbor's television at night. My cat Daisy prowled the unfamiliar corners nervously, her tail twitching with anxiety that mirrored my own. I tried to make it feel like home, arranging my furniture and hanging family photos, but everything felt wrong. Too small, too temporary, too much like giving up. 3 weeks after I moved in, a certified letter arrived. I almost didn't open it, assuming it was something mundane about the rental lease. Instead, it was from a law firm in Seattle. My younger sister Patricia, who had passed away 2 years earlier from cancer, had left me a small property in her will, a studio apartment in downtown Portland that she'd bought as an investment years ago. The paperwork had been delayed due to estate complications, but it was finally settled. The apartment was mine, fully paid off, no mortgage. I sat at my tiny kitchen table, reading and rereading the letter. Patricia and I had drifted apart in her final years. She'd lived in Seattle, absorbed in her art career, while I was busy with work and caring for Daniel. I'd visited her in the hospital before she died, but we'd never discussed her assets. She'd left me something valuable, something nobody else knew about, and for the first time in months, I felt a small flicker of power return to my chest. The apartment was on the 4th floor of an older building with character. High ceilings, hardwood floors, and large windows that flooded the space with natural light. It was small but beautifully maintained, with a shared rooftop garden and a quiet, respectful community of residents. I stood in the empty studio, my footsteps echoing, and felt something I hadn't felt in my rental: possibility. The building manager, a kind woman named Ruth, explained that Patricia had rented it out for years before her illness, and the previous tenant had moved out just before her death. "Your sister spoke about you sometimes," Ruth said, showing me the rooftop garden. "She said you took care of everyone else your whole life. Maybe she wanted you to have something just for yourself." I didn't tell Michael or Tara about the apartment. Something inside me, some instinct for self-preservation, kept me silent. I visited it twice a week, slowly furnishing it with pieces from thrift stores and estate sales. I brought books, plants, my favorite photographs. It became my secret sanctuary, a place that belonged only to me. When Michael called occasionally to check in, asking how the rental was working out, I simply said, "It's fine." And it was fine, because I didn't need it anymore. I had options now. I just wasn't ready to use them yet. Not until the right moment arrived. Sunday dinners had once been sacred in our family. When Daniel was alive, Michael would come over every week without fail. We'd cook together, laugh, share stories about our weeks. After Daniel passed, the tradition continued for a while, but gradually the visits became less frequent. After I sold the house, they stopped entirely. "We're just so busy, Mom," Michael would say when I suggested getting together. "Work has been crazy for both of us." I stopped suggesting. Weeks turned into months. My birthday came and went with a text message from Michael and a generic e-card from Tara. I spent the day alone with Daisy, eating takeout Chinese food and watching old movies. The loneliness was heavy at first, pressing down on me like a physical weight, but slowly something shifted. I started attending a book club at the local library. I volunteered at a community garden on Saturday mornings. I reconnected with old friends from the hospital, women I'd lost touch with during my years of focusing solely on Michael. I wasn't waiting for my son to remember me anymore. I was remembering myself. And in that remembering, I found a quiet strength I'd forgotten I possessed. The hurt was still there, buried deep, but it no longer controlled me. I was done shrinking myself to make room for people who didn't value me. I heard the news at church. I'd started attending services again, finding comfort in the familiar hymns and the warm community. After the service, I was helping arrange flowers in the vestibule when I overheard two women talking near the bulletin board. "Did you hear about the layoffs at Summit Marketing?" one of them said. "My niece works there. They let go of half their executive team last week." Something cold ran down my spine. Summit Marketing. That was Tara's company. I continued arranging roses, my hands steady, but my mind racing. "Terrible timing," the other woman replied. "Right before the holidays, too. So many families affected." I didn't react. I simply smiled politely when they acknowledged me, finished with the flowers, and walked to my car with measured steps. At home, I didn't call Michael to ask if it was true. I didn't search for news articles or check Tara's social media. Instead, I made myself tea, sat in my rental apartment with Daisy purring in my lap, and waited. If this was true, I would hear about it eventually. And if karma was real and I was beginning to believe it was, it had just picked up its pruning shears. The garden of their arrogance was about to face some serious trimming. All I had to do was be patient. 3 weeks later, my phone rang at 8 in the evening. Michael's number. I let it ring 4 times before answering, my heart steady in my chest. "Hi, Michael." "Mom." His voice cracked slightly. "We need to talk." "What's wrong?" I asked, though I already knew. Tara lost her job. The company had massive layoffs. They let go of all the senior marketing executives. She's been trying to find something new, but nothing's coming through. And she had this business idea, tried to launch it online, but it's not generating any income. He paused, and I could hear him breathing, gathering courage for what came next. "We're behind on the mortgage, 3 months behind. The bank sent a foreclosure notice." I sat down slowly at my kitchen table. "I'm sorry to hear that, Michael." "Mom, I don't know what to do. We've cut everything we can. Tara's applying everywhere, but the job market is brutal right now. My salary alone isn't enough to cover everything." Silence stretched between us. I knew what he wanted to ask, but I waited, letting him sit with his discomfort the way I'd sat with mine when Tara called me Deadweight. Finally, he said it. "Could you possibly help us? I know you're on a fixed income, but maybe a loan? Anything?" "I'll think about it, Michael," I replied quietly. "Let me sleep on it." After I hung up, I sat in the darkness, listening to the highway traffic through my thin walls and felt absolutely nothing. Not satisfaction, not anger, not even pity. Just a vast, empty calm. The woman who had humiliated me now needed me, and I would help them, but only on my terms. 2 days passed before my phone rang again. This time it was Tara. I almost didn't answer, my thumb hovering over the decline button. But curiosity won. "Eleanor?" Her voice was different, thin, stripped of its usual confidence. "I'm calling because Michael said you might be willing to help us." "I told Michael I'd think about it," I replied calmly. "Yes, I know. I wanted to call personally, too." Her voice broke. Actual tears. "Eleanor, I'm desperate. We're going to lose everything. The house, our credit, everything we've built. I've been applying to jobs every single day. I've lowered my salary requirements, expanded my search to other cities, but nothing is working. The online business was supposed to be our backup, but without capital to invest in proper marketing, it failed before it even started." She was rambling now, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I know we haven't been as attentive as we should have been. I know I've been difficult sometimes, but we're family, and families help each other, right?" I listened quietly, letting her fill the silence with explanations and justifications and thinly veiled apologies. The woman who had called me Deadweight in front of dinner guests was now begging me to lift her up. Finally, she stopped talking, waiting for my response. "I need time to consider what I can do," I said carefully. "I'll call you back in a few days." "Eleanor, please." I said, "I'll think about it, Tara." I hung up before she could respond. That pause, that silence, that refusal to immediately solve their problem, it was my power, and I intended to use it wisely. I spent the next few days visiting their neighborhood. Not to see them, I was careful about timing, but to observe. The foreclosure sign was already posted on their front lawn. Tara's expensive SUV was gone, probably repossessed or sold. The curtains were drawn, and the once pristine yard showed signs of neglect. Dandelions sprouted between the paving stones. The flower beds I'd helped them plant when they first moved in were overgrown with weeds. I sat in my car across the street, engine off, and felt an unexpected emotion wash over me. Closure. Not joy at their suffering. I wasn't cruel enough for that. But a kind of peaceful resolution, like watching a book reach its inevitable ending. They had built their life on a foundation of arrogance and carelessness, and now that foundation was crumbling. I hadn't caused this. I had simply refused to keep propping them up. Still, I wasn't heartless. They were struggling, and Michael was my son, regardless of his mistakes. I would help them, but they needed to understand that help came with conditions now, that my kindness wasn't weakness, and my generosity wasn't something to be exploited. I drove to Patricia's apartment, my apartment, and sat in the quiet space, thinking through my plan carefully. Finally, I picked up my phone and called Michael back. "I have a solution," I said when he answered. "Tell Tara to stop looking for apartments. You can use my spare place." The relief in his voice was immediate. "Mom, thank you. Thank you so much." "We'll discuss details when you move in," I said simply, and ended the call before he could ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. Moving day arrived on a cold October morning. I stood on the building's front steps, watching their rented moving truck pull up. They'd sold or donated most of their furniture. The apartment was furnished already, so there were only a dozen boxes and some personal items. Michael climbed out first, looking exhausted. He'd aged in the months since I'd last seen him properly. New lines around his eyes, gray threading through his dark hair. Tara emerged from the passenger side, wearing jeans and an old sweatshirt instead of her usual designer clothes. Her face was bare of makeup, her expression hollow. They both looked diminished somehow, like plants that hadn't been watered in too long. "Hi, Mom," Michael said, attempting a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thank you again for this. You're really saving us." Tara stayed silent, standing behind Michael like she was using him as a shield. I nodded, gesturing toward the building entrance. "Fourth floor. The elevator's just inside." As they unloaded boxes, carrying them up one by one, I watched from the stoop. Other residents passed by, greeting me warmly. I had become a familiar face here during my visits. Ruth, the building manager, stopped to chat, loud enough for Tara and Michael to overhear. "Your nephew and his wife, right?" she asked, and I didn't correct her. Let them wonder. When the last box was finally inside, I followed them up. They stood in the small studio, looking around at the space that would be their new reality. One room, one bathroom, no yard, no extra bedrooms, no space to hide from each other. "It's perfect, Mom," Michael said, though his eyes told a different story. "Really, it's more than enough." I smiled gently, and for the first time in months, I felt something shift inside my chest. Satisfaction. Not from their suffering, but from knowing that for once, I held all the cards. Funny how small people look when pride finally leaves them. That evening, after they'd unpacked enough to sleep, I invited them to my rental apartment for dinner. I'd prepared a simple meal, roasted chicken, vegetables, bread. Nothing fancy, but more than they'd been eating lately, based on Michael's thinness. We sat around my small table, the three of us, tension thick in the air. "Before we go any further," I said calmly, setting down my fork, "we need to establish some ground rules." Tara's head snapped up, surprise flickering across her face. "Ground rules? The apartment is furnished and rent-controlled, which is why I can offer it to you at a reasonable price. $700 a month, utilities included. Rent is due on the 1st, no exceptions." Michael nodded quickly. "Of course, Mom. That's more than fair. There's no smoking anywhere on the property, including the rooftop. The shared spaces, laundry room, garden, lobby, must be kept clean. You're responsible for your own mess." I continued methodically. "The building is quiet after 9 p.m. Respect your neighbors. Ruth manages the property, so if you have maintenance issues, contact her, not me." Tara bristled slightly, her jaw tightening. I could see her struggling with the reality that she was no longer calling the shots, no longer the one with power in this relationship. "And one more thing," I added, meeting her eyes directly. "This is temporary help, not a permanent solution. I expect you to keep looking for work, to rebuild your finances, and to eventually move into your own place again. How long do we have? Michael asked nervously. As long as you need, I replied. But I'll know if you're not trying. Tara opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again. For the first time in the 3 years I'd known her, she had no words, no clever retorts, no smug superiority. She simply nodded, swallowing her pride with visible effort. That small nod, it was more satisfying than any apology could have been, because it meant she finally understood. She wasn't the one in control anymore. The autumn days grew shorter and colder. I settled into a new routine, one that didn't revolve around waiting for Michael's calls or trying to maintain a relationship that had become one-sided. Instead, I focused on myself. I started spending Saturday mornings in the rooftop garden at Patricia's building, tending to the shared vegetable beds and flower boxes. The other residents gradually adopted me as their unofficial garden keeper. Harold, a retired teacher from the second floor, taught me about composting. Nina, a young graphic designer who lived across from Michael and Tara's unit, brought coffee and chatted about her freelance projects. Word spread that I was Michael's mother, and the residents welcomed me with warmth that felt genuine, untainted by expectation or obligation. One Saturday, I was deadheading roses when I heard voices float up from the open rooftop door. "Is that woman always here?" Tara's voice, sharp with irritation. "She's lovely," Nina replied cheerfully. "She's been helping everyone with their plants. My herbs have never looked better." I didn't react, simply continued my work, but something warm spread through my chest. Respect. Simple human respect. It was the sweetest kind of revenge. Not because I'd sought it, but because I'd earned it by simply being myself. When I finally left the garden that afternoon, I passed Tara in the hallway. She looked away quickly, but not before I saw the expression on her face, resentment mixed with something else. Envy, perhaps. Or maybe just the slow, painful realization that being liked and respected isn't something you can buy or fake. It's something you have to cultivate, like a garden, with patience and genuine care. The cracks in their marriage began to show within the first month. The thin studio walls meant I heard more than I wanted to when I visited the building. Their arguments carried through the hallway, sharp and bitter. One evening in November, I stopped by to drop off some extra blankets I'd found at a thrift store. I knocked, and Michael answered, his face drawn. "Mom, hey, thanks for these." Behind him, I could see Tara at the small table, papers spread everywhere. Bills, by the look of them. "How are things?" I asked carefully. "We're managing," he said, but his eyes told a different story. "Michael," Tara's voice cut through the apartment. "Did you call about the payment extension or not?" He flinched. "Not yet. I'll do it tomorrow." "You said that yesterday. We're running out of time." Their voices rose, and I stepped back. "I'll leave you to it," I said quietly. Later that week, Ruth mentioned she'd heard them arguing in the laundry room. "That poor boy looks exhausted," she said sympathetically. "And his wife, she just seems angry all the time." I didn't comment, but I thought about Michael, the sweet child who used to help me bake cookies, who'd rushed to show me his good grades, who'd once told me I was his hero. Somewhere along the way, he'd lost himself in trying to please someone who would never be satisfied. I couldn't fix their marriage, but maybe their situation would force them to see what they'd become. That evening, Michael called me alone. "Mom, I need to apologize. For everything. For not standing up for you when Tara said those things. For convincing you to sell your house. For disappearing from your life." His voice broke. I was so caught up in trying to make her happy that I forgot about the person who'd always been there for me. I closed my eyes, feeling tears threaten. "Thank you for saying that, Michael." "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted. "Maybe you start by figuring out what you want, not what Tara wants," I suggested gently. After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of my rental, and for the first time in months, I felt hope. Not for their situation, but for my son finally finding his way back to himself. December brought the first snow, blanketing Portland in unusual white. The city wasn't prepared for it. Roads closed, buses stopped running. The rooftop garden transformed into a winter wonderland, and the building residents gathered there for an impromptu celebration one Saturday afternoon. Harold brought hot cider. Nina strung lights along the railing. I made cookies, Same recipe I'd used when Michael was young. We stood in the cold, bundled in scarves and gloves, watching the snow fall over the city. Michael and Tara came up briefly, drawn by the laughter and warmth. I watched my son's face as he took in the scene, neighbors chatting easily, sharing food and stories, the simple joy of community. His expression held a longing that made my heart ache. Tara stood apart, arms crossed, checking her phone constantly. She'd had several interviews in recent weeks, but no offers yet. The rejection was wearing her down visibly. "Your mother's quite popular here," Harold said to Michael, clapping him on the shoulder. "We're lucky to have her." Michael looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw recognition dawn in his eyes. Recognition of something he'd lost, or perhaps something he'd never properly valued. That evening, he knocked on my rental door. "Can I come in?" he asked. We sat with tea, Daisy curling up on his lap immediately. She'd always loved him. "I used to think success meant a big house and an impressive career and keeping up with everyone else," he said slowly, stroking Daisy's fur. "But watching you at the building, seeing how people actually like you, how you've built this community," he trailed off. "That's real wealth, isn't it?" "It's one kind," I agreed. "The kind that doesn't disappear when circumstances change." He nodded, understanding settling over his features. "I've been so focused on what we lost that I couldn't see what I still had." I reached across and squeezed his hand. My son was finally waking up. The question was, would it be too late? The argument that changed everything happened 3 days before Christmas. I was visiting the building to deliver small gifts for the residents, homemade jam I'd canned that fall, when I heard the shouting from the hallway. "You're the one who wanted the big house!" Tara's voice rang out. "You're the one who said we needed to impress everyone, because you were never satisfied." Michael shot back, his voice raw. "Nothing I did was ever enough for you. Bigger house, better car, fancier restaurants. You measured our worth by what we owned, and now we don't own anything. Don't blame me for your failures." "You're right, I can't blame you," Michael said, and something in his tone made me pause outside their door. "But I can blame myself for letting you treat the person I love most in the world like garbage. My mother gave us everything, and you repaid her by calling her Deadweight." Silence fell. Then Tara, her voice cold. "She was in our way." "No," Michael replied, quiet but firm. "She was never in our way. We just convinced ourselves she was because it was easier than admitting we were drowning in our own arrogance." I didn't knock. I left their gift outside their door and walked back down the hallway with my heart pounding. That night, Michael called. "Did you hear us fighting today?" "I heard some," I admitted. "Mom, I'm done. I can't keep pretending this is working. Tara and I..." He paused. "We've built our marriage on the wrong foundation. Money, status, appearances, and now that it's all gone, there's nothing left holding us together." "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I don't know yet," he said. "But I know I need to figure out who I am without her constantly telling me who I should be." It wasn't the ending I'd imagined for their marriage, but maybe it was the ending they needed. Sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes you have to love yourself more than you love someone else's idea of who you should be. And my son was finally learning that lesson. For Christmas dinner, I invited Michael and Tara to my rental apartment. The same setup as that terrible dinner party where Tara had called me Deadweight. Simple meal, candles, my good dishes. I'd debated whether to recreate it intentionally, but decided some things don't need to be forced. Karma has its own timing. They arrived separately. Michael came first, carrying wine and looking nervous. Tara showed up 20 minutes late, her expression guarded. We sat around the small table, the tension palpable. I served the meal, roasted chicken, the same recipe as always, and we ate in silence for several minutes. Finally, Tara set down her fork. "Eleanor, I need to say something." I looked up, waiting. "I was cruel to you, not just that night at dinner, but many times. I treated you like you were less than me because you weren't wealthy or impressive by my standards, and I convinced Michael to do the same." Her voice was steady, but her hands shook slightly. "I won't make excuses. I was wrong." I studied her face, looking for sincerity, and found something surprising: genuine shame. The arrogance that had defined her was gone, stripped away by months of struggle and humiliation. "Thank you for saying that," I replied quietly. "But words are easy, Tara. Actions matter more. She nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. I know, and I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I see it now, what I did, what I took from you. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was simply honest, raw and real and necessary. Michael reached across and took my hand. I'm sorry too, Mom, for all of it. I squeezed his hand, then looked at Tara, then back at my son. This moment, it wasn't revenge anymore. It was something more valuable, truth. And sometimes truth is the only gift worth giving. The revelation came in early January. I was in the rooftop garden, clearing snow from the pathways, when Nina approached with her usual morning coffee. Eleanor, I've been meaning to ask, she said casually. How did you end up owning the apartment your son is renting? That's such a generous thing to do for family. I paused mid-shovel, realizing my mistake. In all these months, I'd never clarified the ownership situation with the residents. They'd simply assumed I was the landlord. My sister left it to me, I explained. I'd been visiting to fix it up, and when Michael needed a place, it worked out. Nina nodded, then called across the garden to Tara, who just emerged from the stairwell. Tara, did you know Eleanor owns your apartment? I just thought she'd arranged it with the landlord, but it's actually hers. The color drained from Tara's face. She stood frozen on the rooftop, staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Horror, humiliation, disbelief. What? She whispered. I set down the shovel slowly, meeting her eyes. My sister Patricia left me the apartment when she passed away. I'd been keeping it as I paused, choosing my words carefully, a backup plan. You've owned it this whole time? Tara's voice rose slightly. Since before you suggested I downsize. Before I sold my house. Understanding dawned on her face, followed by a wave of shame so intense I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. She stood there in the snow, realizing the full scope of what had happened. The woman she'd called Deadweight, the woman she'd convinced to sell her home and move into a small rental, had been quietly securing her own future while they'd been destroying theirs. And now they were living under that woman's roof, paying rent to her, dependent on her kindness. So when we needed help, Tara said slowly, you didn't have to scramble or sacrifice. You just offered us what you already had. Yes, I replied simply. The truth needed no embellishment. Tara's legs seemed to give out. She sat down hard on a snow-covered bench, her face in her hands. After a long moment, she looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. We're living under the roof of our Deadweight. I didn't confirm or deny it. I just stood there, letting her sit with the full weight of her own words turned back on her. Sometimes the universe delivers justice in the most poetic ways possible, and all you have to do is stand still and let it happen. Tara disappeared into the apartment after the rooftop revelation. For 3 days, I didn't see her emerge. Michael visited my rental to explain. She's devastated, he said, collapsing onto my couch. The realization of everything she did to you, and then finding out you'd been in a position to walk away from us at any time but chose to help anyway. He shook his head. It broke something in her, Mom. In a good way, I think. What do you mean? I asked. She's been crying and writing, he explained. Letters, I think. I haven't pushed her to talk, but she's processing something big. A week later, Tara knocked on my rental door. She looked thinner, paler, but somehow more present than I'd ever seen her. Can we talk? She asked. I invited her in, made tea, and waited. I've spent my whole life measuring worth by accomplishments and status, she began, her hands wrapped around the warm mug. My parents raised me to believe that success was the only thing that mattered, that people were either useful or they weren't, that sentimentality was weakness. Her voice cracked. I treated you the way I was taught to treat anyone who didn't advance my goals, and I was wrong, so fundamentally, devastatingly wrong. I listened quietly, letting her speak. You taught me something these past months, she continued. Strength doesn't need an audience. Real power isn't about controlling people or situations. It's about knowing your worth so completely that you don't need anyone else to validate it. She met my eyes, and I saw genuine transformation there. You never yelled at me, never gloated. You just kept being kind and dignified, and it made everything I did look even uglier in comparison. I'm not a saint, Tara, I said gently. I had moments where I wanted to hurt you the way you hurt me. But you didn't, she replied. You took the high road when I deserved the low one. That's the difference between us. We sat in silence for a long moment. I don't expect forgiveness, she said finally. I just wanted you to know that I see you now, really see you. And I'm sorry it took losing everything for me to learn how to look. I reached across and touched her hand briefly. Thank you for saying that. And Tara, you haven't lost everything. You lost things. There's a difference. She nodded, tears falling freely now. And for the first time since I'd met her, I felt something toward her that wasn't anger or hurt, compassion. Because understanding your own cruelty and living with it, that's its own kin.